Greetings and salutations, all you beautiful individuals. You know it is another epi of League Unlocked. My name is Eric, flying Han Solo. On today's episode, as we are reminiscing something that's, well, we're currently still in the middle of, and that is kind of paying an homage to the absolute utter display of dominance that we have seen from Gen.G over the last couple of years. We're specifically pulling out some stats and numbers and ideas that are literally going to blow your mind. Not literally, because that would be tragic and would probably be the end of you, but we're looking specifically since Chovy joined Gen.G for the majority of these, and that's going back to 2022 spring, because that's really where it feels like the switch was flipped into this dynamic, dare I say, dynasty of Gen.G began. Maybe 2022 summer, when they actually won that first title, is when things really turned around. But since Chovy has joined Gen.G is really when things got out of control, and these numbers are absolutely ludicrous. We're just going to start with how they've performed at every single tournament since that 2022 spring season. And when you break it down, we're talking about 15 major tournaments. That's including domestic titles within the LCK, international events, even including the Voldemort that is EWC being included. So 15 major tournaments they've been a part of. They've won 7 titles out of that 15. That's a near 50% of all tournaments Gen.G has entered. They've come away with a crown or a trophy or some whatever reward it is that they get for winning. Out of those 15, 10 times they've at the bare minimum made it to the finals. So again, we're well north of now 60% of these events. They're at the very least in the finals. Obviously, they've had a couple of losses to Hanwha Life in the LCK and then T1 in the early days of this dynasty in 2022, and they've only been outside of the top 4 of these 15 events on 2 occasions. And of course, people still are going to remember the World Championships. That's where, there's some semifinal losses, obviously, to T1. And then, of course, BLG, they lose in semis. That's the main ones that seem to stick and sit inside of people's memories. But that's even more impressive than T1. I know T1 has the insane Worlds run where they've got 3 straight finals. But as a whole body of work over these now north of 3+ years, 10 out of 15 finals in every major event, international and domestic included, is absolutely insane. And the consistency for a team that a lot of the time, been labeled as chokers. Obviously, that specifically kind of applies to Chovy in that mid lane. But now we're sitting here, and they have been the most consistent team for the better part of 3 years. So that's just an appetizer for this one. When you dive a little bit deeper and look at the specific numbers, let's say even regular season, I know that's not as hype as the titles, as the championships, but these are the numbers that are absolutely even more insane. And we're handpicking a little bit because we're going to 2023 summer, so a year and a bit after Chovy joined the squad. But this is where the numbers started getting absolutely out of control. We're talking about regular season records within the LCK: 79 wins, 7 losses. That's their series record since 2023 summer. So they've only lost 7 series across 2023 summer, all of 2024, and what we have so far in 2025. 7 series total is all that they've lost. And when you look at that overall game score, it gets even more insane. 161 map wins, if you want to call it that, which usually you called maps in League of Legends, but whatever. 161 games they've won, 28 games that they have lost. Again, that's not series losses, that's 28 games total over 2.5 years within the LCK. So yes, absolutely a nightmare to match up. Obviously, that has been them breaking records time and time again in terms of overall game score. I believe 3 game losses was the lowest they had in an 18-0 season. Obviously, they had multiple 17-1 splits, a 16-2 split. These are would have been records at the time, and they're shattering their own records in terms of individual dominance. And listen, it's a long regular season in the LCK, so the fact that they are this consistent against even some of the lower tier teams, right? It's easy to have an off day and drop a series or drop at least more games to some of these squads, but that just speaks to, the consistency, which is the theme in these first couple of stats that GenG has shown time and time again on the Rift. And you want to talk breaking records, how about specifically win streaks? Obviously, when you're putting together such insane numbers, you're bound to break a few win streak records, and they've done it twice, 2 different stints of these ludicrous win streaks. The one more fresh in our minds is, of course, from 2025, where you had 27 series wins in a row. You're talking 21 best of 3s that went through the entirety of that round 1 of, again, this reformatted LCK, where they went 18-0. They won a couple of best of 3s to qualify for the midseason invitation. Proceeded to win every single best of 5 matchup at MSI, and you can even include EWC, which they ended up winning again. So 2 international titles within that 27 series win streak before they ultimately fell to T1 early on in rounds 3 to 5 of split 3 in the LCK. Again, the format, it gets a little wishy-washy even over the last couple of years. And even before that, the record they were breaking was a 24-game win streak in 2024, where they went on a 11 series win streak in spring. They went 3-0 in playoffs in spring to qualify for MSI, and of course went undefeated at MSI. Then they went on to win 6 series in summer before, if you want to include the inaugural EWC event, where they lost, I believe, right away in their opening round. But if you were to exclude that Mickey Mouse kind of tournament, they actually won 33 games in a row. Dating, they won more splits or more one series in LCK Summer before KT Roaster eventually took them down. But how about 27 and 24 or 33, whatever you want to do, separate win streaks, 2 different times over 2 years. North of 20 series win streaks is unheard of and will be a greatest moment in the history of pretty much every other organization that's ever existed in LoL eSports, and these guys did it in back-to-back years. So even without these world championships, I'm ready to be dubbing Gen.G a dynasty because of the sheer dominance that they have had as a team. Internationally now, because you can include these MSI back-to-back titles. I know they're not as highly coveted as the World Championship, but MSI is still much more competitive and a much more difficult tournament to win than the first 6, 7, 8 years that MSI was even a tournament internationally. When you break it down specifically, and again, we're going from when Chovy joined Gen.G because that seems to be like the biggest turning point. So let's deep dive into some of the numbers for Chovy, or the Church of Chovy himself. We're going to pull up some numbers from champion-specific stats. And first and foremost, a 374 and 127 overall win-loss record is good enough for a 74.6. Call it 75 to round it up and make it nice and clean. That is his win rate on Gen.G. 75%. 3 out of 4 games Chovy has won since he's been on Gen.G. If you had that number in solo queue, you would be so many thousands of points ahead of the next person on the solo queue ladder. It would be laughable. And this guy, this team, is doing it on the professional stage. So we look at some of these specific champion numbers for Chovy, and there's some you would expect and some that are okay, like 17-3 on Galio for an 85% win rate. Again, these are a lot of champions that are just 80% win rate champions. 21-4 on Yone, 19-4 on Talia, 44-11 is approaching the ludicrous numbers that Deft used to have on Jinx that we were always highlighting. And then the champions he's played a lot more, 42-12 on Ari. He's even 53-20 for a pedestrian 72.6% win rate on Azir. But this list goes on. There's only a couple champions you can even talk about that he's hovering at a 50% win rate and you can extrapolate that a little more to his whole career. But obviously, the Gen.G era has been far and away the most dominant out of Chovy, and I mean, those numbers back it up. He's got the titles, he's got the trophy case, he's got the individual awards and the individual numbers. The Galio one, by the way, not only is he 17-3 across 20 games, his KDA is over 11, not just double digits, 11 on a melee champion in the mid lane, and it's a champion that would be on like the 5th round of bans that you'd want to put against Chovy, not one that you normally associate aside from an insane 4-man game-saving ulti that he had a few years on DRX. But on Gen.G, I'm not worried about Chovy's Galio, but now maybe you should be if you're doing a little bit of research on this guy. And specifically, we highlight in on Chovy because you now look at this era of Gen.G, and there's actually been 8 different teammates that Chovy has played around, and he has been the only consistent member throughout this incredibly dominant run. And I know these are world-class, near best in the role players that he's had during these times. We're talking Doran and Keen in the top lane. Keen has pretty consistently been the 1B to the 1A of Zeus over the last couple of years. Peanut and Canyon are arguably two of the greatest not arguably, are arguably 1-2 in terms of best junglers of all time. And then Ruler and Pays, obviously one of the most hyped up rookies of all time. Ruler probably the GOAT when it comes to AD carry. And Ruler and Lahans, when you include support, these are guys who have come multiple times. They've had 2 different stints within the Gen.G organization, and I think the reason guys like Canyon, the reason Ruler and Lahans are guys that want to come back to Gen.G is they want to play around a guy like Chovy, and because he's been the best mid laner of his generation. Faker's still the best mid laner, best player of all time, but of this era since Chovy has joined, I don't think there's any question that he has been the most dominant mid laner. Delight and Duro, also the 2 guys I didn't mention, but there's still some movement, and to be so dominant with so many different players, and I mean, it's not just Chovy. You can speak to all these players, because when you look at these all-pro teams within the LCK, just to pull out another kind of absolutely bonkers stat, there's the first, second, third team all-pros going back to 2022 summer. We're not including 2022 spring because that's when T1 was incredibly dominant. So again, a little bit handpicked. But since 2022 summer, every one of these all-pro awards, and that's 5 different times they've done them. So there's, 25 first team all-pro and 50 first or second. Gen.G members have been on either the first or second all-pro team for 24 out of these 25 available slots since 2022 summer. There's only been one time that one of them wasn't on there, and that was a 3rd team all-pro, I think probably Doran a few years ago. And on top of that, of the 6 LCK MVPs handed out, 3 of them have gone over to a member of Gen.G. That's 2 for Chovy and 1 for Ruler. But obviously, there's a pretty easy correlation for the insane regular season and playoff dominance that Gen.G has had, that, yeah, they're obviously going to be featured quite heavily on these all-pro teams. But again, I'm going to say the buzzword of the video again, the consistency out of Gen.G as a whole. And again, it's multiple players. When you were looking at the regular season numbers, like the LCK Cup, where they went 3-2, I think 7-4 overall was their yuckiest number that you could talk about. And that was truthfully when Duro was kind of leveling up to now be one of the better supports that's in the LCK. And it's been a mix now of these incredibly veteran savvy players like Keen, like Peanut, like Chovy, like Canyon, but guys like Pays and Duro come in as rookies, as unproven, albeit, highly touted and talented mechanical young players, but completely unproven on the biggest stage. And they get dropped into this Gen.G lineup that immediately the pressure and aspirations aren't for you to be competing with T1 and Humble Life. They're for you to be the best team in the LCK. And Duro and Pays both pretty quickly and comfortably slid into those roles. And we've seen evolution. Like, we've seen 18-0 teams get better. We've seen Chovy develop an even more well-rounded game where he's now fully a leader and is propping up his teammates. And stuff he wasn't doing early on in his career, where he was so laser narrow-minded and focused on the laning phase, lane kingdom, dominating individually, just focused on what was going on for him within the mid lane. But now he has fully expanded that to the entirety of Summoner's Rift and even off the Rift relationships and dynamics within the team. So the growth of Chovy and all these players around him is an absolute true testament to how and why Gen.G has been so unbelievably dominant so far. So dominant that there's even more numbers we can pluck out away from the champion-specific ones and the win rates within the regular season. How about Pentakills? An easy one. And I know in modern League of Legends, it's about 257% easier to get a Pentakill because some of the new champions are absolutely insane. But during this stretch, again, we're going this little bubble of since Chovy joined Gen.G, 10 different Pentakills within the Gen.G organization. 2 of them out of Chovy, 2 of them out of Ruler, and how about 6 Pentakills for Pays on Gen.G? He's obviously racked up a few more on JDG and in the challenger scene, but absolutely insane to have 10 Pentakills in that stretch. And we got to highlight specifically on Pays here because this guy has the second most Pentakills by a player of all time. He's not even 20. He's 19 years old. He's already got 11 Pentakills to his name. Again, a couple of those are from the challenger scene, so they get maybe a 0.5 on that one. But this is, most of the time, let's be honest, more often than not, a Pentakill in a pro game, you're maybe diving a Nexus at the end of the game when you're already incredibly far ahead. It's the final team fight of the game and your AD carry's already got like 10 kills and is clean enough to do it. That's fine. That's where some of these are. But it's still impressive because that's how often you're dominating, or you have one guy who's so incredibly fed that he's just two-tapping basically everybody on the opposition. And specifically Pays, you can go one deeper for an insane stat and talk about the 2024 MSI finals where he got that Callista pentakill and set maybe one of the more impossible records in a pool of unlikely records to break for Gen.G, and that is the 28 kill game that we're referencing, where he got that penta on Callista. 28 kills, come on, absolutely nobody is ever going to match that in a pro game. That's a crazy stat line, again, in a solo queue game. To do it on stage in a grand final of an international event against the best team from the LPL speaks to the level of dominance. That series wasn't even close, despite BLG putting together some insane highlights and wombo combos to even just steal a game or get back into a game. The level of dominance was absolutely insane out of Gen.G for that one, and 10 pentakills as an org during that stretch has got to be up there. Maybe Gala has more as himself, but he's been on multiple teams. So one team for Gen.G to have that many, absolute treat to watch. And then we get to the final. Nutty stat that, if you did the math, you could kind of know this, but we know that the T1 Gen.G rivalry, that's it. It's the rivalry. I don't care what other region, I don't care who you're coming with to talk about. Wow, who's comparable to that? Ain't nobody comparable to T1 Gen.G. And T1 has the World Championships. Yes, they beat Gen.G in those World Semifinals in 2024, where maybe people thought Gen.G should have been the favorite. Yes, they have that number. But when you look at Grand Finals specifically, I'm not talking semis, I'm not talking quarters, I'm talking about the finals of an event. Doesn't matter if it's the LCK or an international one. Gen.G is 5-1 against T1. That one loss coming from the beginning of this dynasty era of Gen.G 2022 spring. Since then, the rivalry has fully shifted to 5 straight finals that Gen.G has won. Most of those coming within the LCK, yes, but now we've got the more recent MSI event in 2025 that Gen.G came away with the finals victory, and we're, by the way, also won the upper bracket final against T1, but 5-1 against the greatest organization in the history of the game in the highest stakes matches. That is a title on the line, is maybe the most impressive and insane stat that Gen.G has during this incredibly dominant run. And I know we're always talking about that every broadcast, everyone loves to bring up this head-to-head between Chovy and Faker that's constantly going one versus the other. It's almost perfectly split down the middle. It was like 65-65 head-to-head at one point, but that has definitely shifted over the last couple of years, because you're including the years where T1, then SKT, was beaten up on Griffin and a rookie Chovy. You've got the years on DRX and Hanwha Life where Chovy's team wasn't really that good. It was just a kind of standout performance out of him. Sure, they're getting to Worlds, but nobody was actually expecting them to make noise or do anything outside of getting out of the group stage. But again, the magic number or the magic timeline of when Chovy joined Gen.G, since then, this rivalry has fully shifted into the favor of Gen.G and Chovy specifically, and I think the result has been a tested T1 that really hasn't been pushed to this level ever, and that's how you get the T1 that you get at Worlds, is because they're training against this immovable object domestically that is Gen.G, that time and time again T1 are blocked from getting yet another LCK title. And yes, again, they got the World Championships, but a lot of that you got to feel like is because they're being pushed into that hyperbolic time chamber that is matching up against Gen.G time and time again. And you probably even saw that in Hanwha Life in 2024 when they won that summer split, and then when they were going to first stand. It's just training against this best of the best, and all it really takes is a world championship to come the way of Gen.G, and then you're talking about Chovy and this era of generation gaming really being one of the most dominant runs of all time. And I'm putting that ahead of some of these dominant SKT and T1 runs. I know getting one world championship for somebody like Chovy doesn't put him in that category, but imagine Canyon gets another world championship. If now Ruler were to get another world championship, and Gen.G winning Worlds would really jumpstart and skyrocket a lot of these guys' careers in the all-time rankings, and obviously Chovy is at the first and foremost of it, and I'm happy to have a front row seat to the continued dominance of the LCK by a whole, and specifically Gen.G. But that is it today for League Unlocked. My name is Eric. Thank you to all you absolute stunners for hanging out and supporting us as always. You know we appreciate you, and we will catch you